At my engagement party, my sister Vivian stood up and laughed. "That's the cheapest ring I've ever seen," she announced to our entire family. Everyone stared at my hand. What she didn't know was that my fiancé's security team was already watching her every move. By the end of the night, she would discover exactly who she had just insulted, and her world would never be the same. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The engagement party was supposed to be a celebration. I had spent weeks planning every detail in my small apartment in Millfield Heights, carefully budgeting to make sure everything was perfect. The living room was decorated with white and gold streamers, and I had ordered a modest cake from the local bakery. My fiancé, Daniel Kingston, had insisted we keep things simple and intimate, which I thought was sweet and considerate given my family's modest means. I was wearing the engagement ring he had given me 3 months earlier, a simple band with what appeared to be a small, unremarkable stone. To me, it was the most beautiful thing in the world, because it represented Daniel's love and our future together. I had met Daniel at the Riverside Community Center, where I volunteered teaching art classes to underprivileged children. He had been there donating supplies, dressed casually in jeans and a simple t-shirt, and something about his genuine kindness had drawn me to him immediately. Our relationship had developed slowly and naturally. Daniel never flaunted wealth or spoke about money. He drove a modest Honda Civic, wore simple clothes, and seemed to genuinely enjoy our quiet dates at local coffee shops and walks through Millfield Park. He had told me he worked in business consulting, and I had never pressed for details. What mattered to me was that he was kind, intelligent, and treated me with more respect and love than I had ever experienced. My family had finally agreed to meet him at this engagement party. My parents, Robert and Linda Thorne, had been cautiously supportive, though they worried about my tendency to be too trusting with people. But it was my older sister Vivian who had been the most skeptical from the moment I announced my engagement. Vivian Thorne Williams lived in the wealthy Oakmont district with her investment banker husband, Preston Williams. She had always been the successful sister, the one with the MBA from Westbridge University, the designer clothes, the luxury car, and the sprawling house with the perfect lawn. Our parents had always held her up as the example I should follow, though Vivian had made it clear throughout our lives that she considered me the family disappointment. As guests began arriving that evening, I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. My parents came with warm hugs and a bottle of champagne. My college roommate, Rachel Porter, brought her infectious smile and a beautiful photo frame as a gift. My coworker from the Millfield Elementary School where I taught 3rd grade, James Morrison, stopped by with his wife, and congratulations. But when Vivian arrived with Preston, the atmosphere in the room shifted immediately. She swept in wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary, her own massive diamond wedding ring catching the light as she gestured dramatically. Her eyes immediately went to my left hand, and I saw something flicker across her face. Disappointment, maybe even disgust. "So this is the mystery man we've been hearing about," Vivian said, extending a perfectly manicured hand to Daniel. "I'm Victoria's older sister, Vivian, the successful one." Daniel smiled warmly and shook her hand. "It's wonderful to meet you, Vivian. Victoria speaks about her family constantly. I'm Daniel." "Just Daniel?" Vivian's eyebrow arched. "No last name? How mysterious." "Kingston," Daniel replied simply. "Daniel Kingston." I watched Vivian's expression, but the name didn't seem to register with her. She turned her attention back to me, her smile sharp and cold. "Well, Victoria, let's see this ring that has you so excited." My heart sank. I had hoped to avoid this moment, but I extended my hand anyway. The modest ring suddenly felt tiny and insignificant under the harsh scrutiny of my sister's gaze. Vivian took my hand and examined the ring closely, her expression growing more disdainful by the second. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "This is sweet." The conversation around us began to quiet as people sensed the tension building. My parents exchanged worried glances from across the room. Rachel stepped closer, as if sensing I might need support. "It's beautiful," I said quietly, trying to end the moment before it escalated. But Vivian wasn't finished. She had an audience now, and she had never been one to waste an opportunity to remind everyone of her superior status in life. "I mean, I suppose it's the thought that counts," she continued, her voice growing louder, "though I have to wonder about a man who proposes with something like this." "Vivian," my mother said softly, a warning in her voice. "No, Mom, someone needs to say it," Vivian declared, releasing my hand and turning to face the room. "I'm worried about Victoria. She's always been too trusting, too willing to settle for less than she deserves." My face burned with embarrassment as every eye in the room focused on us. Daniel remained calm beside me, but I could feel the tension radiating from his body. "What are you trying to say?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Vivian looked directly at Daniel, then back at me, her expression a mixture of pity and superiority. "I'm saying that a man who truly loves you, a man who can properly provide for you, doesn't propose with a ring from the clearance section of a department store." The room fell completely silent. Someone's glass of champagne stopped halfway to their lips. The soft background music suddenly seemed deafeningly loud. "This ring," Vivian continued, gesturing at my hand, "probably costs less than my monthly manicure appointment. And if this is how he treats you during the proposal, how do you think he'll treat you in marriage? Victoria, you're settling for someone who clearly doesn't value you properly." I felt tears prick at my eyes, but before I could respond, something strange happened. I noticed two men in dark suits standing near the doorway, men I didn't remember inviting to the party. They had appeared so quietly that I wondered how long they had been there. One of them was speaking quietly into what looked like a small device in his ear. Daniel noticed my distraction and followed my gaze. When he saw the men, something shifted in his posture. He straightened slightly and gave them an almost imperceptible nod. "Vivian," Daniel said, his voice still calm but carrying a new authority that hadn't been there moments before, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." But my sister was on a roll now, emboldened by what she perceived as support from the stunned silence of our guests. "No misunderstanding at all," she laughed. "That's the cheapest ring I've ever seen, and I've seen plenty. A real man, a successful man, shows his commitment with something that reflects his ability to provide. This little trinket says everything about what kind of future you can expect with him." As she spoke, more people in dark suits seemed to materialize around the edges of my small apartment. I counted at least 4 now, all professional, all watching the scene with intense attention. My neighbors would later tell me they had seen black SUVs parked up and down the street, though I hadn't noticed them when the party began. One of the suited men approached Daniel and whispered something in his ear. Daniel nodded once, then looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, protective, almost dangerous. "Victoria," he said softly, "I think it's time your sister learned exactly who she's been insulting." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The silence that followed Daniel's words was deafening. My sister Vivian stood in the center of my living room, still holding court with her cruel assessment of my engagement ring, completely oblivious to the shift in atmosphere around her. The men in dark suits had positioned themselves strategically throughout my small apartment, and I could see my guests beginning to notice their presence with growing confusion and unease. "Learn what exactly?" Vivian scoffed, her voice dripping with condescension. "That he managed to afford something from the jewelry counter at Walmart instead of a gas station? Victoria, wake up. This man is clearly using you, and you're too blind to see it." My parents looked mortified. My father, Robert, stepped forward as if to intervene, But my mother, Linda, placed a restraining hand on his arm. They had learned over the years that confronting Vivian directly usually made her performances worse. My college friend Rachel moved closer to me, her protective instincts kicking in, while my coworker James and his wife exchanged uncomfortable glances near the refreshment table. Preston, Vivian's husband, looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. He had experienced his wife's social cruelty before, but never quite this publicly or with such venom. "Vivian," he said quietly, "maybe we should." "No, Preston," she cut him off sharply. "Someone needs to protect my little sister from making the biggest mistake of her life." "Look at him," she gestured toward Daniel dismissively. "Look at his clothes, his car parked outside. Everything about him screams middle-class mediocrity. And this ring," she grabbed my hand again, holding it up for everyone to see. "This is an insult disguised as a proposal." The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. This wasn't just criticism. It was character assassination designed to humiliate both Daniel and me in front of everyone we cared about. I felt my cheeks burning with shame, not because I believed her words, but because she was saying them at all, destroying what should have been one of the happiest nights of my life. "You know what your problem is, Victoria?" Vivian continued, warming to her theme. "You've always had low standards. In school, in your career choices, in the men you date. You settle for whatever scraps of attention come your way because you don't believe you deserve better." My hands were trembling now. 28 years of living in my sister's shadow, of being compared to her achievements, of being reminded that I was the disappointment in the family, all came flooding back. Every childhood moment when she had been praised while I was criticized, every family gathering where her successes were celebrated, while my modest accomplishments were barely acknowledged. "Remember Thomas Fletcher from college?" she pressed on. "That loser you dated for 2 years, who couldn't even afford to take you to a decent restaurant? Or what about Ryan Mitchell, who lived in his parents' basement at age 30? You have a pattern, Victoria, and this," she waved dismissively at Daniel, "is just the latest example." The personal attacks were escalating beyond anything I had experienced from her before. She wasn't just criticizing my engagement, she was systematically dismantling my entire romantic history, my judgment, my self-worth, all in front of an audience of family and friends. The humiliation was becoming unbearable. Daniel remained remarkably calm throughout her tirade, but I could see something dangerous building behind his eyes. The men in suits had moved even closer, and one of them was speaking continuously into his earpiece, though I couldn't make out his words. My neighbors later told me that more black SUVs had arrived during the party, and men in suits were now stationed outside the building as well. "And another thing," Vivian continued, her voice rising with righteous indignation, "what kind of man lets his fiancé host their own engagement party in this tiny apartment? A real man would have rented a proper venue, hired caterers, made it special. But no, poor Victoria has to do everything herself because her boyfriend can't afford to treat her properly." My mother gasped audibly at this attack. Even she, who had always favored Vivian, looked shocked at the cruelty of the assault. My father's face was red with anger, and I could see him struggling not to intervene. "That's enough," Rachel said firmly, stepping between Vivian and me. "You've made your point. Maybe it's time to—" "I'm not finished," Vivian snapped, turning her fury on my friend. "This is a family matter, and Victoria needs to hear this. She's about to make a terrible mistake, and as her sister, I have a responsibility to stop her." The word responsibility hung in the air like a slap. This wasn't concern. This was cruelty masquerading as care. It was public humiliation wrapped in the pretense of sisterly duty. And it was working. I could feel my confidence crumbling under the weight of her attacks, my joy in the engagement dissolving into shame and doubt. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Vivian's husband Preston was staring at Daniel with a strange expression, not confusion or sympathy, but something that looked almost like recognition. His face had gone pale, and his eyes kept darting between Daniel and the men in suits positioned around the room. "Preston," I said quietly, noticing his expression. "Are you okay?" Before he could answer, Vivian grabbed the spotlight again. "The point is, Victoria, you deserve better than this charade. You deserve a man who can provide for you properly, who values you enough to show it with actions, not empty promises and costume jewelry." She held up my hand one final time, the modest ring catching the apartment's overhead light. "This ring probably cost less than my lunch yesterday. And if this is how he treats you during the proposal, the moment when men are supposed to pull out all the stops, imagine how little effort he'll put into your marriage." The attack had reached its crescendo. My sister had systematically destroyed my engagement announcement, attacked my fiancé's character and financial status, criticized my apartment, my choices, my entire life, all while positioning herself as the caring sister trying to save me from disaster. The room was utterly silent except for the quiet voices of the security team speaking into their earpieces. My guests stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene, leave, or simply witness the complete destruction of what should have been a celebration. That's when Daniel stepped forward, his calm demeanor never wavering, and said the words that would change everything. "I think it's time you learned exactly who you've been insulting, Vivian. And more importantly, I think it's time you learned what that ring actually is." The security team immediately moved closer, their attention focused entirely on my sister, who was still basking in the aftermath of her performance, completely unaware that her world was about to be shattered in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. The moment Daniel finished speaking, something extraordinary happened. One of the men in dark suits stepped forward and spoke in a voice that commanded immediate attention. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back from Mr. Kingston." Vivian's head snapped toward the voice, her expression shifting from triumph to confusion. "Excuse me? Who are you people? And what are you doing in my sister's apartment?" "Security detail, ma'am," the man replied crisply. His name tag read, quote, "Commander Hayes," and everything about him radiated professional authority. "And I suggest you lower your voice when addressing Mr. Kingston." The color drained from Vivian's face as the implications began to sink in. Preston, who had been growing paler by the minute, suddenly grabbed his wife's arm. "Vivian," he whispered urgently, "we need to leave, now." "Leave? Why would we leave?" But even as she said it, I could see doubt creeping into her voice. The confidence that had carried her through her cruel performance was beginning to crack as she looked around the room at the professional security personnel who had materialized seemingly from nowhere. My parents stood frozen near the kitchen entrance, my mother's hand pressed to her mouth in shock. Rachel had moved even closer to me, her arm around my shoulders in a protective gesture. James and his wife were slowly backing toward the door, clearly uncomfortable with whatever was unfolding. Daniel walked over to me, his movements calm and deliberate. Up close, I could see something different in his posture, in the way he carried himself. The gentle, unassuming man I had fallen in love with was still there, but there was an underlying strength and authority that I had never noticed before. "Victoria," he said softly, taking my hands in his, "I'm sorry this happened. I had hoped we could have a normal, quiet celebration without any of this." He gestured subtly toward the security team. "But your sister has forced my hand." "Daniel, I don't understand," I whispered. "Who are these people? What's happening?" Before he could answer, Vivian found her voice again. "This is ridiculous. I don't care who you think you are or what kind of elaborate prank this is supposed to be. Victoria, don't let him manipulate you with this theater. Anyone can hire actors to dress up in suits." Commander Hayes stepped forward again. "Ma'am, Mr. Kingston is attempting to have a private conversation with his fiancé. I'm going to ask you one more time to step back and lower your voice. And I'm going to ask you to get out of my sister's apartment before I call the police." Vivian shot back, her voice rising to match her growing panic. That's when Preston finally cracked. Vivian, stop talking. Please, for once in your life, just stop talking. His voice was strained, almost desperate. You don't understand what you've done. Everyone turned to stare at Preston. His successful investment banker composure had completely crumbled, and he was looking at Daniel with an expression that mixed fear, recognition, and something that might have been awe. Preston? Daniel's voice was curious, but not unkind. Do we know each other? Not personally, sir, Preston replied, and I noticed he had unconsciously straightened into something resembling a respectful posture. But I know who you are. Everyone in high-level finance knows who you are. Oh God, Vivian, what have you done? My sister whirled on her husband. What are you talking about? Stop acting crazy and help me figure out what's going on here. Daniel looked at me with genuine regret in his eyes. Victoria, I never wanted you to find out this way. I was planning to tell you everything after we were married. Once I was sure you loved me for who I am, not what I have. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear over the sound of blood rushing in my ears. Tell me what, Daniel? He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out what looked like a business card, though it was made of heavy, expensive-looking paper. He handed it to me, and I saw my own hands shaking as I took it. The card was simple but elegant. Daniel Kingston, Chief Executive Officer, Kingston Global Enterprises. I stared at the card, the words not quite computing. Kingston Global? But that's... I trailed off, trying to remember where I had heard that name before. The third largest private corporation in the world, Preston finished for me, his voice barely above a whisper. With holdings in technology, real estate, energy, and finance across 47 countries. Annual revenue of approximately $230 billion. The room spun slightly. I grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself as the magnitude of what Preston was saying hit me. Daniel, is this real? It's real, he said gently. And Victoria, I need you to look at your ring again. I looked down at the modest band on my finger, the simple stone that Vivian had mocked so cruelly. Under the apartment's lighting, it looked exactly as it always had. Small, unpretentious, unremarkable. This isn't a cheap ring, sweetheart, Daniel said softly. It's a 15-carat pink diamond, one of only 12 in existence. It was mined in Australia and cut by the most exclusive jeweler in Switzerland. The setting is platinum, and the band contains smaller diamonds that are each worth more than most people's cars. I stared at the ring with new eyes, but it still looked the same to me. But it looks so simple. I know, that was intentional. The truly valuable things in life don't need to be flashy or obvious. I wanted to give you something that would be beautiful to you, because of what it represented, not because of how much it cost. Vivian had been listening to this exchange with growing disbelief and horror. That's impossible, she said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. If that were true, it would be worth approximately $4.7 million, Commander Hayes said matter-of-factly. And that's just the insurance valuation. The actual market value would be considerably higher given its rarity. The number hit the room like a physical blow. My mother gasped and sat down heavily in the nearest chair. My father's face went through a series of expressions that ended in something resembling shock. Rachel's arm tightened around my shoulders, and I could feel her trembling. But it was Vivian's reaction that was the most dramatic. The blood drained completely from her face, and she stumbled backward as if she had been pushed. 4.7 million? She repeated weakly. The ring she's been calling cheap for the past 20 minutes, Daniel confirmed. The ring she suggested I bought at a gas station. The ring she said proved I didn't value Victoria properly. Preston was now visibly sweating. As someone who worked in high-level finance, he understood better than anyone what this revelation meant. His wife hadn't just insulted a wealthy man. She had publicly humiliated one of the most powerful people in the global economy. Mr. Kingston, Preston began, his voice shaking, My wife didn't know. She had no idea who you were or what the ring was worth. Please, she was just trying to protect her sister, in her own misguided way. Protect her? Daniel's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath now. By systematically attacking her character, her choices, her worth as a person? By attempting to destroy her happiness on what should be one of the most important nights of her life? Commander Hayes spoke quietly into his earpiece, then addressed the room. Sir, we have confirmation that all exterior positions are secure. The building is contained, and we're ready to proceed with whatever you decide. The implications of his words sent a chill through everyone present. This wasn't just about a misunderstanding over a ring anymore. This was about a woman who had publicly and cruelly attacked someone with the resources to make that attack very costly. Daniel looked at me with an expression of infinite tenderness and regret. Victoria, I am so sorry you had to experience this. You deserved better than having your engagement announcement turned into a battleground. I don't understand any of this, I managed to say. You drive a Honda Civic. You wear regular clothes. You never acted like a billionaire? He smiled sadly. Because I'm not, in the ways that matter. I'm still the man who met you at the community center, who loves your laugh and the way you get paint in your hair when you're teaching art class. The money doesn't change who I am inside, but it does change how I can respond when someone tries to hurt the people I love. The weight of everything that had happened, everything that was still happening, suddenly crashed over me. I looked around the room at my family, my friends, the security team, and my sister, who was still standing in shocked silence, finally understanding the magnitude of her mistake. What happens now? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Daniel's expression grew more serious. Now we find out why your sister felt it was appropriate to launch such a vicious attack on someone she had never met before. Because this wasn't just about a ring, Victoria. This was personal, calculated, and cruel. And I have a feeling there's much more to this story than we've discovered yet. As the reality of Daniel's identity settled over the room, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. My sister Vivian wasn't looking shocked anymore. She was looking cornered. Her eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal, and she kept glancing at her husband Preston with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't the look of someone who had made an innocent mistake. It was the look of someone whose carefully laid plans had just exploded in their face. Daniel, I said quietly, still trying to process everything, I need to understand something. How did you know to have security here tonight? This was just supposed to be a small family gathering. Commander Hayes stepped forward before Daniel could answer. Ma'am, we've been monitoring potential threats to Mr. Kingston for several weeks. Your sister's name came up in our investigation. What? I turned to stare at Vivian, who had gone even paler if that was possible. What does that mean? Daniel's expression hardened. It means this wasn't a spontaneous attack, Victoria. Your sister has been planning something like this for months. The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. My parents looked bewildered, clearly struggling to understand how their family gathering had turned into something from a spy movie. Rachel tightened her grip on my arm, and I could feel her protective instincts kicking into overdrive. That's ridiculous, Vivian said, but her voice cracked slightly. How could I plan anything? I didn't even know who he was until 5 minutes ago. Didn't you? Commander Hayes pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through what appeared to be documents. Mrs. Williams, were you or were you not contacted by Meridian Investigative Services 6 weeks ago? Preston made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a groan. Oh God, Vivian, tell me you didn't. Didn't what? I demanded, looking between my sister and her husband. Someone please explain what's happening. Commander Hayes continued consulting his tablet. Meridian Investigative Services is a private investigation firm that specializes in background checks on high-net-worth individuals. They were hired to compile a comprehensive report on Mr. Kingston's personal life, his romantic relationships, and specifically his engagement to you, Miss Thorne. My legs felt weak. I sank into the nearest chair, trying to process what I was hearing. Vivian, you hired investigators to spy on my fiancé? I was protecting you, she burst out, her careful composure finally cracking completely. You're so naive, Victoria, so trusting. When you said you were engaged to some random guy you met at a community center, someone had to make sure he wasn't using you. Using me for what? I asked, though I was beginning to understand the horrible logic of her actions. For money, obviously, for your inheritance from Grandmother Thorne. Vivian's voice grew more defensive with each word. You always were too trusting with men. I thought this Daniel person was probably some con artist who had figured out you were coming into money and was trying to marry you for it. The room went silent except for the quiet sounds of the security team continuing to communicate through their earpieces. My grandmother had indeed left me a substantial inheritance, nearly $800,000, that I would receive on my 30th birthday, still 18 months away. But I had never mentioned this to Daniel, and I couldn't understand how Vivian thought it would make me a target for fortune hunters. Vivian, my father said slowly, his voice filled with a disappointment I had rarely heard from him. You hired strangers to investigate your sister's fiancé without her permission? Someone had to be responsible, she snapped back. Victoria certainly wasn't going to do her due diligence. She never does. She just falls in love with whatever loser gives her attention and expects everything to work out fine. Daniel had been listening to this exchange with an expression that grew darker by the moment. Commander Hayes, what exactly did this investigation uncover? Hayes consulted his tablet again. The investigators discovered your true identity approximately 4 weeks ago. They compiled a comprehensive report on your business holdings, your net worth, your family background, and your previous relationships. This report was delivered to Mrs. Williams 3 weeks ago. I felt like I was going to be sick. So you've known for 3 weeks? You've known that Daniel was wealthy, and you still decided to attack him tonight? No, you don't understand, Vivian said desperately. The report didn't make sense. It claimed he was worth billions, but look at him. Look at how he dresses, what he drives, where he lives. I thought the investigators had made a mistake. I thought they had confused him with someone else who happened to have the same name. Preston, who had been growing more agitated throughout this conversation, suddenly exploded. Vivian, stop talking! Just stop talking before you make this worse. Worse how? She demanded. I was trying to protect my sister from what I thought was an obvious con man. How is that worse? Because, Preston said, his voice shaking with barely controlled panic, you didn't just attack a con man. You publicly humiliated Daniel Kingston. Do you have any idea what that means? Do you understand the kind of power you've just insulted? Commander Hayes spoke into his earpiece again, then addressed Daniel. Sir, we've completed the background check on Mrs. Williams. There are some additional findings you should be aware of. Go ahead, Daniel said grimly. Mrs. Williams has been in significant financial difficulty for the past 8 months. She and her husband have been living well beyond their means, and they're currently facing foreclosure on their Oakmont district home. Additionally, there are substantial credit card debts and a second mortgage that's in default. I stared at my sister in shock. The successful, wealthy image she had always projected, the designer clothes, the luxury lifestyle she had always held over me. It was all a lie? Vivian, is this true? It's temporary, she said quickly. Preston's firm is going through a rough patch, but we'll recover. We always do. No, we won't, Preston said quietly. Vivian, we're going to lose everything. The house, the cars, everything. I've been trying to tell you for months. But you keep spending money we don't have. Keep pretending everything is fine. The pieces of a horrible puzzle were beginning to come together in my mind. The inheritance, I said slowly. This is about Grandmother Thorne's inheritance. Vivian's face flushed red. Don't be ridiculous. No, it makes perfect sense now, I continued, the revelation hitting me like a physical blow. You were counting on me to help you financially when I turned 30 and received the inheritance. But if I marry Daniel, if I have a wealthy husband, I won't need that money. I might even decide to do something else with it entirely. That money is family money, Vivian said. her voice growing desperate. Grandmother Thorne would have wanted it to help the whole family, not just you. She left it specifically to me, I replied firmly. In her will, she left it to me for my education, my future, my choices, not for your mortgage payments. Commander Hayes cleared his throat. There's more, sir. Mrs. Williams has been in contact with several financial advisors and lawyers over the past 6 weeks, apparently seeking information about ways to contest or delay the distribution of the inheritance. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. My sister hadn't just hired investigators to spy on Daniel. She had been actively working to undermine my inheritance, to find ways to get her hands on money that wasn't hers, all while pretending to be concerned about my welfare. You've been planning to steal from me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The investigation, the attack on Daniel tonight, all of it was about getting access to grandmother's money. I wasn't stealing, Vivian protested. I was trying to make sure you made smart decisions. If you married some fortune hunter, he would have taken everything. At least if the money stayed in the family. It would end up in your bank account, Daniel finished coldly. Because you're facing financial ruin, and you see your sister's inheritance as your salvation. The room fell silent again as the full scope of Vivian's deception became clear. She hadn't been protecting me from a fortune hunter. She had been trying to eliminate what she saw as competition for money she had no right to claim. My parents looked devastated. The daughter they had always held up as the successful one, the responsible one, had been lying to them for months about her financial situation while scheming to take money from her own sister. How long? I asked quietly. How long have you been planning this? Vivian's composure finally cracked completely. Since Preston lost his job 8 months ago, she admitted. Since we realized we were going to lose everything. I thought if I could convince you to share the inheritance, or if I could prove you were making a mistake with this marriage, maybe you would help us. Maybe you would remember that family is supposed to take care of family. By hiring investigators to spy on me, by publicly humiliating the man I love, by trying to destroy the happiest night of my life? My voice was getting stronger, anger beginning to replace the shock and hurt. That's your idea of family? Daniel placed a protective hand on my shoulder. Victoria, there's something else you need to know. The attack tonight wasn't just about money. Your sister has been spreading rumors about you and about me throughout Millfield Heights for weeks. My blood ran cold. What kind of rumors? Commander Hayes consulted his tablet once more. She's been telling people that you're being manipulated by an older man, that you're making poor financial decisions, that you might not be mentally competent to handle a large inheritance. She's been building a case for why the family should intervene in your personal affairs. The systematic nature of the betrayal was breathtaking. This wasn't just greed or desperation. This was a calculated campaign to undermine my credibility, my relationships, and my right to make my own decisions about my life and my money. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I saw her clearly. Not as the successful older sister I had always admired and feared, but as a desperate woman who had been willing to destroy her own family to solve her financial problems. Get out, I said quietly. Victoria, please, you have to understand. Get out of my apartment, get out of my life. And stay away from my inheritance, my fiancé and me. As Vivian and Preston gathered their things and prepared to leave, escorted by 2 members of Daniel's security team, I realized that this was just the beginning. If my sister had been willing to go this far, there was no telling what other damage she might have done, or what other secrets were yet to be uncovered. After Vivian and Preston left my apartment under security escort, the remaining guests gradually departed as well. My parents, still reeling from the revelations about their supposedly successful daughter, hugged me tightly before leaving, promising to call in the morning. Rachel lingered the longest, making sure I was emotionally stable before reluctantly heading home. Soon, it was just Daniel, Commander Hayes, and 2 other security personnel remaining in my small living room. We need to know the full extent of what your sister has done, Daniel said gently, sitting beside me on the couch. Hayes, what else did your investigation uncover? Commander Hayes opened a leather portfolio and spread several documents across my coffee table. Sir, this goes much deeper than we initially suspected. Mrs. Williams hasn't just been investigating you. She's been systematically working to isolate Miss Thorne from her support network and undermine her credibility in the community. I stared at the documents, recognizing some of them as official letterhead from various institutions around Millfield Heights. What do you mean, isolate me? 3 weeks ago, your sister contacted the principal at Millfield Elementary School where you work, Hayes explained, pointing to one of the documents. She expressed concerns about your mental state, claiming you were making erratic decisions and might not be fit to work with children. My blood ran cold. She tried to get me fired? The principal, Mrs. Catherine Donovan, documented the conversation but didn't act on it because she found your sister's concerns unfounded based on your excellent work performance. However, she did place a note in your personnel file about the inquiry. Daniel's jaw tightened. What else? Hayes flipped to another document. She also contacted the Riverside Community Center where you volunteer, making similar claims about your mental fitness. The director, Mr. Anthony Rodriguez, was similarly skeptical but felt obligated to document the complaint. I felt sick to my stomach. She was trying to destroy my reputation, make people think I was unstable. It gets worse, Hayes continued. She contacted your bank, Millfield Savings and Trust, claiming to be concerned about unusual financial activity on your accounts. She suggested that someone might be manipulating you into making poor financial decisions and requested information about your recent transactions. Did they give her any information? Daniel asked sharply. No, sir. Banking privacy laws prevented them from sharing details, but they did flag your account for potential fraud monitoring, which could have complicated your financial activities going forward. I was beginning to understand the scope of what Vivian had been planning. She was building a case to have me declared incompetent, wasn't she? So she could gain control of my inheritance. That appears to be the strategy, Hayes confirmed. She's been creating a paper trail of supposed concerns about your judgment and mental state. If she had succeeded in getting you fired or having your volunteer position terminated, she could have used that as evidence that multiple institutions had concerns about your stability. Daniel stood and began pacing, his calm demeanor showing cracks for the first time. How did we not catch this sooner? Sir, we only began monitoring potential threats after your engagement was announced publicly 6 weeks ago. Mrs. Williams was careful to present her inquiries as concerned family members checking on a vulnerable relative. It wasn't until we started connecting the pattern that we realized this was a coordinated campaign. Hayes pulled out another set of documents. There's more. She's been in contact with elder law attorney Harrison Mitchell, inquiring about guardianship procedures and inheritance disputes. She specifically asked about cases where family members successfully challenged the mental competency of inheritance beneficiaries. The betrayal felt so complete, so calculated, that I could barely process it. My own sister had been working for months to have me declared mentally unfit so she could steal my inheritance. Every conversation we'd had, every family gathering, every expression of sisterly concern had been part of this elaborate deception. Victoria, Daniel said softly, kneeling beside my chair, I need you to think carefully. Has your sister ever suggested that you see a therapist or counselor? Has she tried to get you to sign any documents or make any statements about feeling overwhelmed or unable to handle your responsibilities? The memory hit me like a physical blow. 2 months ago, I whispered. She called me after a particularly difficult day at school and suggested I might benefit from talking to someone about stress management. She even recommended a specific therapist, Dr. Eleanor Hartwell. Hayes was already typing on his tablet. Dr. Hartwell practices in the Oakmont district, correct? Near your sister's home? Yes, how did you? I stopped, realizing the implication. She was going to have me see a doctor who would diagnose me as unstable. We'll need to investigate Dr. Hartwell's connection to your sister, Daniel said grimly. Hayes, add that to the priority list. Hayes nodded and made notes. Sir, there's one more document you need to see. He handed me a legal paper with the header of a family law firm. This is a draft petition for emergency guardianship, filed by your sister as the concerned family member. It was never submitted to the court, but it's fully prepared and notarized. I read through the document with growing horror. In legal language, it painted me as a vulnerable young woman who had become isolated from her family, was making erratic financial decisions, and was being manipulated by an unknown male companion who had undue influence over her judgment. It requested that the court grant Vivian temporary guardianship over my affairs, including control of my inheritance, until a full psychological evaluation could be completed. This is dated last week, I said, my voice shaking. She was planning to file this after tonight. After she had publicly demonstrated your poor judgment in front of your family and friends, Daniel said, the pieces falling into place. The attack on me, the humiliation about the ring, all of it was designed to show that you were making irrational decisions and couldn't be trusted with money. Hayes pulled out his phone. Sir, I'm getting reports from our team that Preston Williams is attempting to liquidate assets rapidly. He's been on the phone with brokers and real estate agents since leaving the apartment. They're panicking, Daniel observed. They know their plan has been exposed, and they're trying to salvage what they can before the legal consequences catch up with them. I stood up abruptly, anger finally overriding the shock and hurt. I need to call my grandmother's attorney. If Vivian has been preparing legal challenges to the inheritance, I need to make sure it's protected. Already handled, Daniel said. My legal team contacted Barrister and Associates an hour ago. Jonathan Barrister confirmed that your inheritance is secure, and that any challenges would need to prove actual mental incompetency, not just family concerns. The efficiency with which Daniel's team had been working was both impressive and slightly overwhelming. How long have you known about all of this? We suspected something was wrong when the investigation firm your sister hired started making inquiries about me, he explained. At first, we thought it might be media attention or potential business competitors trying to gather intelligence. But when we traced it back to your sister, we realized this was personal. Commander Hayes cleared his throat. Sir, there's one more thing. Our financial investigators have discovered that Mrs. Williams has been in contact with several payday loan companies and high-interest lenders. She's borrowed against the assumed future access to her sister's inheritance. What does that mean? I asked, though I suspected I didn't want to know the answer. It means she's already spent money she doesn't have, using your inheritance as collateral for loans she can't repay, Daniel explained. If she doesn't gain access to your inheritance, she's facing criminal charges for fraud in addition to her existing financial problems. The desperation behind Vivian's actions was becoming clearer. This wasn't just about greed or sibling rivalry. She had committed crimes based on the assumption that she would be able to steal my inheritance, and now she was facing the consequences of those crimes. So tonight wasn't just about humiliating me, I said slowly. It was her last chance to salvage a plan that was already falling apart. Exactly, Hayes confirmed. Our investigation suggests that she's been growing increasingly desperate over the past month, as her financial situation deteriorated and her legal preparations weren't progressing as quickly as she needed. Daniel took my hands in his. Victoria, I know this is overwhelming, but we need to discuss what you want to do next. Your sister has committed several crimes, including fraud, attempted manipulation of legal documents, and possibly identity theft in her attempts to gather information about you. We can pursue criminal charges, civil litigation, or both. The weight of the decision settled over me. My sister had systematically betrayed me, tried to steal from me, and worked to destroy my reputation and relationships. But she was still my sister, still the woman who had read me bedtime stories when we were children, still part of my family. I need time to think, I said finally. I need to understand everything she's done before I decide how to respond. Of course, Daniel said. But Victoria, you should know that regardless of what you decide about your sister, my security team will be staying close until we're certain there are no other threats. Someone who is willing to go this far might be willing to escalate further when they realize their plan has failed completely. As I looked around my small apartment, still decorated with the remnants of what should have been a joyful engagement party, I realized that my life had changed forever in ways I never could have anticipated. I had discovered that the man I loved was one of the wealthiest people in the world, that my ring was worth millions, and that my own sister had been planning to destroy me for months. But perhaps most importantly, I had learned that I was stronger than I had ever imagined, and that I deserved better than the toxic family dynamics that had shaped my entire life. The next morning brought revelations that made the previous night's discoveries seem almost mild by comparison. I woke up in Daniel's penthouse suite at the Grandview Hotel. He had insisted it wasn't safe for me to stay alone in my apartment until they could assess all potential threats. Commander Hayes was waiting in the sitting room with a new stack of documents and an expression that told me the news wasn't good. "Miss Thorne," he said as Daniel and I joined him over coffee, "our overnight investigation has uncovered some disturbing information about your sister's activities over the past year." Daniel squeezed my hand reassuringly. "What did you find?" Hayes opened his portfolio to reveal what looked like bank statements and financial records. "Mrs. Williams has been systematically infiltrating Miss Thorne's personal life in ways we hadn't initially discovered. She's been intercepting and redirecting mail, accessing financial accounts, and even impersonating Miss Thorne in various communications." I felt my coffee cup slip from my suddenly numb fingers. "What do you mean? Impersonating me?" "6 months ago, someone claiming to be you contacted your grandmother's attorney, Jonathan Barrister, expressing concerns about your ability to handle the inheritance responsibly. The caller suggested that you were struggling with depression and anxiety, and requested information about options for early distribution or family management of the funds." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "I never made that call. We know. Our voice analysis team compared the recorded call with your actual voice patterns. It was definitely your sister." Hayes pulled out a transcript of the conversation. "She was very convincing, using personal details about your life and even mentioning specific conversations you had allegedly had with family members about feeling overwhelmed." Daniel's expression grew darker with each revelation. What was Barrister's response? He was appropriately cautious and suggested that any concerns about the inheritance should be discussed in person with proper documentation. He also recommended that Miss Thorne seek professional counseling if she was experiencing mental health challenges. I buried my face in my hands. She was building a case, creating a record of my supposed mental instability going back months. "It gets worse," Hayes continued grimly. "We've discovered that your sister has been accessing your medical records through fraudulent means. She somehow obtained enough personal information to call your doctor's office claiming to be you, expressing concerns about memory problems and asking for your recent visit summaries to be mailed to a different address." "That's impossible," I said. "Medical records are protected. They can't just give information to anyone who calls." She was very thorough in her preparation. "She had your social security number, your insurance information, details about your medical history that only you would know. Our investigation suggests she may have gained access to these details through your apartment while you were at work." The violation felt so complete, so intimate that I could barely process it. "She's been in my apartment, going through my personal things?" Daniel stood and began pacing, his controlled demeanor cracking further. "Hayes, tell me we have evidence of this." "We do, sir. Building security cameras show Mrs. Williams entering Miss Thorne's apartment building on at least 6 occasions over the past 3 months, always during work hours, when Miss Thorne would be at school. She had a key." I stared at him in disbelief. "I never gave her a key." "She had one made," Hayes explained, pulling out another document. "We traced it to Millfield Key Services. She brought in what she claimed was her spare key to her sister's apartment, saying she needed a duplicate for emergencies. The systematic nature of the invasion was breathtaking. My sister hadn't just been planning to steal my inheritance. She had been living a double life as me, accessing my medical records, speaking to my attorney, making decisions about my property and my life without my knowledge or consent. "What else?" Daniel asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. Hayes hesitated, which told me the worst was yet to come. "Sir, we've discovered that Mrs. Williams has been in communication with several of Miss Thorne's former romantic partners, gathering information that could be used to paint a picture of instability or poor judgment." My stomach dropped. She contacted my ex-boyfriends? 3 of them, including Thomas Fletcher from your college years, and Ryan Mitchell, whom she mentioned during her attack last night. She presented herself as a concerned sister gathering information for a potential intervention. I felt physically sick. The men I had dated, the private moments and personal struggles I had shared with them, had been weaponized by my own sister to build a case against me. What did they tell her? "Mr. Fletcher apparently shared details about your struggles with anxiety during college, particularly around exam periods. Mr. Mitchell discussed your financial concerns when you were dating, including your stress about student loans and living expenses." "Normal struggles that every college student faces," Daniel said angrily. She was taking ordinary life challenges and reframing them as evidence of mental instability. Hayes nodded. "She was particularly interested in any instances where you had expressed doubts about major life decisions, times when you had asked for their advice or support, any occasions where you had seemed overwhelmed or uncertain. I realized that Vivian had been constructing a narrative of my entire adult life that painted me as indecisive, unstable, and incapable of managing my own affairs. Every moment of normal human vulnerability had been cataloged and twisted into evidence that I couldn't be trusted with my inheritance. There's more," Hayes continued reluctantly. "She also contacted your college roommate, Rachel Porter." "Rachel?" I gasped. "But Rachel was at the party last night. She was supporting me. She didn't say anything about Vivian contacting her." "The conversation happened 3 weeks ago. Mrs. Williams called Miss Porter claiming to be organizing a surprise party for your birthday and wanting to gather stories about your college years. She specifically asked about any times you had made impulsive decisions, any occasions where you had struggled academically or socially. I thought about Rachel's protective behavior the night before, the way she had positioned herself close to me when Vivian began her attack. She knew. Rachel knew what Vivian was really doing. Miss Porter apparently became suspicious during the conversation when Mrs. Williams kept pushing for negative stories and seemed disappointed when Miss Porter only had positive things to say about you. Miss Porter later tried to call you to warn you, but Mrs. Williams had asked her to keep the surprise party planning confidential." Daniel sat back down beside me, his anger now mixed with what looked like admiration. "So Rachel figured out your sister was up to something and came to the party prepared to protect you." "It appears so, sir. Miss Porter also documented the conversation and contacted us this morning after hearing about last night's events. She's prepared to testify about your sister's attempts to gather damaging information. The revelation that Rachel had been trying to protect me, that she had recognized the threat my sister posed even when I hadn't, brought tears to my eyes, but it also highlighted just how isolated and vulnerable Vivian's campaign had made me." "Hayes," Daniel said, his voice deadly calm, "I want to know everything. Every phone call, every document, every person she contacted. I want a complete timeline of her activities and a full accounting of the damage she's done to Victoria's reputation and relationships." "We're working on it, sir, but there's one more immediate concern." Hayes pulled out his phone. "Mrs. Williams has been attempting to contact Miss Thorne's employer again this morning. She called Millfield Elementary School, claiming there was a family emergency and that Miss Thorne might need extended time off for mental health reasons." I stood up abruptly, anger finally overriding the shock and hurt. She's still trying to get me fired. Even after being exposed last night, she's still trying to destroy my life." The principal, Mrs. Donovan, refused to take any action based on a phone call and insisted that any employment issues would need to be discussed directly with you. But she did document the call, and she's expressed concern about the pattern of inquiries from your sister. Daniel's phone rang, and he answered it immediately. "Kingston." He listened for a moment, his expression growing grimmer. "Are you certain? How much?" Another pause. "Double the security detail immediately." He hung up and turned to us. "That was my financial crimes investigator. Your sister has taken out additional loans this morning, using forged documents that claim you've agreed to use your inheritance as collateral. She's now borrowed against money she doesn't have access to from multiple sources." The implications hit me like a physical blow. She's not just planning to steal from me anymore. She's already stolen from me. She's used my name and my inheritance to commit fraud. "The total amount borrowed against your inheritance is now approaching $400,000, Daniel said. "If she can't produce that money, she's facing serious criminal charges from multiple lenders." I realized that my sister had crossed a line from which there was no return. This wasn't just about family greed or sibling rivalry anymore. She had committed crimes in my name, damaged my credit, and potentially made me liable for debts I had never agreed to take on. "She's desperate," I said, understanding finally dawning. "She knows her plan failed last night, but she can't stop now because she's already committed crimes that will destroy her if she's caught." "Which means she's more dangerous than ever," Commander Hayes said soberly. "Desperate people make unpredictable choices, and your sister has already shown she's willing to go to extraordinary lengths to get what she wants." Daniel stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. "Victoria, I need you to understand that this isn't just about protecting your inheritance anymore. Your sister has made this personal, and she's escalating her attacks even after being exposed. We need to consider the possibility that she might try something more direct." The thought that my own sister might pose a physical threat to me seemed impossible to believe, but given everything I had learned about her capacity for deception and manipulation, I couldn't dismiss it entirely. "What do you recommend?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "We stop playing defense," Daniel said, turning back to face us. "It's time to take the fight to her." Within 2 hours of Daniel's declaration that we would take the fight to Vivian, his penthouse suite had been transformed into what looked like a war room. Legal professionals, financial investigators, and security experts moved efficiently through the space, each focused on different aspects of building a comprehensive case against my sister. The scale of the operation was both impressive and terrifying. "Miss Thorne," said a woman in her 50s with silver hair and sharp eyes, extending her hand to me. "I'm Elizabeth Crawford, Daniel's chief legal counsel. I've been handling high-stakes litigation for 23 years. And I want you to know that what your sister has done to you is among the most systematic cases of financial and psychological abuse I've encountered." I shook her hand, still feeling overwhelmed by the sudden mobilization of resources on my behalf. "Thank you for coming so quickly." "Daniel's call last night was quite compelling," she said with a slight smile. "When someone attempts to defraud one of our clients and psychologically abuse his fiancé, we take that very seriously indeed." A younger man with wire-rimmed glasses looked up from a laptop at the dining table. "Miss Thorne, I'm Marcus Reynolds, forensic accountant. I've been analyzing your sister's financial activities, and the pattern of fraud is extensive. She's committed at least 12 separate criminal acts in the past 6 months alone." Daniel joined us, carrying a coffee and looking more focused than I had ever seen him. "What's our strongest angle of attack?" Crawford opened a leather briefcase and began arranging documents. "We have multiple avenues: identity theft, mail fraud, wire fraud, forgery, attempted guardianship fraud, and what appears to be a conspiracy to commit financial elder abuse, since she was targeting an inheritance." "Elder abuse?" I asked, confused. But I'm only 28. The inheritance was from your grandmother, Crawford explained. Your sister's attempt to fraudulently gain control of those funds through deception and false medical claims qualifies as elder abuse by proxy. It carries much heavier sentences than simple fraud. Marcus looked up from his laptop again. The financial crimes alone could result in 15 to 20 years in federal prison. But we're also documenting the psychological abuse campaign, which adds additional charges. Commander Hayes entered from the terrace where he had been coordinating with his team. We have confirmation that Mrs. Williams is meeting with someone at Millfield Savings and Trust in 1 hour. Our contact inside the bank says she's attempting to open an account using Miss Thorne's social security number and grandmother's inheritance documentation. Crawford's eyes lit up with what could only be described as predatory satisfaction. Perfect. We'll catch her in the act of committing a federal crime with multiple witnesses. I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. Are we really going to have her arrested? Daniel sat beside me and took my hand. Victoria, I know this is your sister, but she's escalating her crimes even after being exposed. If we don't stop her now, she'll continue to damage your life and potentially hurt other people. A new voice joined the conversation as a tall man in his 60s entered from the hallway. Miss Thorne, I'm Detective Frank Morrison with the Millfield Heights Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. Commander Hayes contacted us this morning, and I've been reviewing the evidence your team has compiled. I recognized the name immediately. Detective Morrison, you investigated the Davidson embezzlement case last year. It was in all the local papers. That's right. And I have to tell you, Miss Thorne, your sister's operation makes Davidson look like an amateur. She's been planning this for at least a year, possibly longer. He pulled out a worn notebook and flipped through several pages. We've been tracking unusual activity in financial institutions around Millfield Heights for months, but we couldn't connect it to a specific perpetrator until now. Crawford leaned forward with interest. What kind of activity? Multiple attempts to access accounts belonging to young adults with known inheritance expectations. Your sister appears to have been researching other potential targets, probably as practice runs before focusing on Miss Thorne. The revelation that Vivian might have victimized other people sent a chill through me. Other targets? Detective Morrison consulted his notes. We have evidence that she attempted to gather personal information about at least 3 other women in the area who were expecting inheritances or insurance payouts. She used similar tactics, contacting employers, medical providers, family members, but apparently decided Miss Thorne was the most vulnerable target. Marcus pulled up something on his laptop and turned the screen toward us. I've been analyzing the financial records, and Detective Morrison is right. There are clear practice runs, small-scale attempts to access other people's information that match the pattern of what she did to you, but on a much smaller scale. Daniel's expression grew even grimmer. So this wasn't just about family desperation. She was running a systematic operation targeting vulnerable people. It appears so, Detective Morrison confirmed, which elevates this from a family dispute to a criminal enterprise. The district attorney is very interested in prosecuting this case as part of a larger crackdown on inheritance fraud. Crawford began organizing documents into neat stacks. Here's what we're going to do. Detective Morrison will coordinate the arrest at the bank. We'll simultaneously file civil lawsuits for damages, obtain restraining orders, and begin the process of recovering any money she's already fraudulently obtained. What about Preston? I asked, thinking about Vivian's husband, who had seemed genuinely shocked by some of her revelations. Mr. Williams is in an interesting position, Crawford said. Our investigation suggests he was aware of his wife's financial difficulties, but may not have known the full extent of her criminal activities. We'll offer him immunity in exchange for his cooperation in testifying against her. Commander Hayes spoke into his earpiece, then addressed the group. Mrs. Williams has arrived at the bank. She's presenting documents to a loan officer now. Detective Morrison stood and checked his watch. That's my cue. Miss Thorne, would you like to be present when we make the arrest? I hesitated, torn between wanting to see justice done and dreading the sight of my sister being handcuffed. I'm not sure. This is all happening so fast. Daniel squeezed my hand supportively. You don't have to decide right now. We can watch from a distance if you want to be there, but not directly involved. Crawford pulled out her phone. I'm calling Jonathan Barrister to make sure your inheritance is completely protected during this process. We'll also need to contact your employer and the community center to let them know they may be contacted by media once this becomes public. The reminder that this would become a public scandal made my stomach churn. Media? Why would they be interested? Daniel Kingston's fiancé being the victim of a systematic fraud scheme? Crawford raised an eyebrow. This will be front-page news in the financial papers and probably make national headlines. We need to prepare for that. Marcus looked up from his laptop with a grim expression. There's something else. I found evidence that Mrs. Williams was planning to expand her operation. She had researched inheritance laws in 3 other states and compiled lists of potential targets. Detective Morrison paused in gathering his equipment. She was planning to go interstate? That brings federal charges into play. FBI is already interested, Commander Hayes confirmed. They'll be joining the arrest team at the bank. I felt overwhelmed by the scale of what was unfolding. What had started as a family dispute over my engagement ring had revealed a criminal enterprise that could result in my sister spending decades in federal prison. Victoria, Daniel said softly, I need you to know that none of this is your fault. Your sister made choices, criminal choices, that brought us to this point. You tried to love her and trust her, and she abused that trust in ways that go far beyond normal family conflicts. Crawford gathered her documents and stood. Miss Thorne, the arrest will happen in approximately 20 minutes. After that, we'll need you to give a formal statement to Detective Morrison and begin the process of documenting all the ways your sister's actions have affected your life. I nodded, still processing the rapid progression from discovery to legal action. What happens to her after the arrest? Given the federal charges and the flight risk assessment, she'll likely be held without bail pending trial, Detective Morrison explained. This isn't the kind of case where defendants typically get released on their own recognizance. Commander Hayes received another communication through his earpiece. Sir, Mrs. Williams has just submitted fraudulent inheritance documents to the bank loan officer. She's requesting an immediate cash advance of $50,000. Crawford smiled grimly. That's federal wire fraud, attempted identity theft, and forgery all in one transaction. The prosecutors will love this case. As the team prepared to leave for the bank, I realized that my sister's attempts to destroy my life had ironically provided the evidence needed to destroy hers. Every lie she had told, every document she had forged, every fraudulent phone call she had made had been carefully documented and would now be used against her in court. Are you ready? Daniel asked, offering me his arm. I looked around the penthouse suite that had been transformed into a command center, at the team of professionals who had mobilized to protect me and seek justice for what Vivian had done. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had allies who were stronger than my sister's capacity for manipulation and deceit. I'm ready, I said, and meant it. As we prepared to leave for the bank where my sister would be arrested, I realized that this moment marked the end of my life as Vivian's victim and the beginning of something entirely new. Whatever happened next, I would face it with the truth on my side and people who genuinely cared about my well-being fighting for me. The scared, isolated woman who had been manipulated and gaslit for months was gone. In her place was someone who had learned her own worth and was prepared to defend it. The arrest at Millfield Savings and Trust unfolded exactly as Detective Morrison had predicted. From our position in Daniel's armored SUV across the street, I watched through tinted windows as federal agents and local police surrounded the building at precisely 2:47 p.m. Vivian emerged in handcuffs 8 minutes later, her face a mask of rage and disbelief as photographers from 3 news outlets captured every moment. But what happened over the next 72 hours revealed that my sister's arrest was just the beginning of something much larger than any of us had anticipated. "Victoria, you need to see this," Commander Hayes said, entering Daniel's penthouse office where I had been staying while the media frenzy died down. He carried a tablet and wore an expression I had learned to associate with significant developments. Daniel looked up from his laptop where he had been coordinating with his legal team. "What is it, Hayes?" 3 more victims have come forward since Mrs. Williams' arrest made the news. Young women from surrounding communities who experienced similar campaigns of harassment and fraud attempts. I felt my stomach drop. 3 more? How is that possible? Hayes set the tablet on the coffee table and pulled up what appeared to be news footage. The first is Jennifer Walsh from Oakmont District. She's 25, recently inherited $200,000 from her grandfather's estate. About 8 months ago, someone claiming to be her cousin began contacting her employer, her bank, and her doctor, expressing concerns about her mental stability. The footage showed a young woman with short blonde hair speaking to a reporter outside what looked like a courthouse. "I thought it was just family drama at first," she was saying. "But then my boss pulled me aside and said someone had called suggesting I might need mental health leave. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong." Daniel paused the video. "Did she report it to police?" "She tried, but without concrete evidence of financial crimes, they classified it as a family dispute. The harassment stopped after about 6 weeks, so she assumed whoever was doing it had given up." I studied Jennifer Walsh's face on the screen. She looks like me. Same age, same hair color, similar background. "That's not a coincidence," Hayes confirmed. Mrs. Williams appears to have been targeting young women who fit a specific profile. Mid-20s, recently inherited money, limited family support systems, and professional jobs that could be jeopardized by questions about mental stability. The systematic nature of my sister's operation was becoming terrifyingly clear. Who are the other 2 victims? Hayes pulled up another news clip. Sarah Martinez, 27, from Riverside Heights. She inherited $350,000 from her parents' life insurance after they died in a car accident 2 years ago. Last year, she began receiving similar harassment, employers being contacted, medical records being accessed, attempts to have her declared incompetent to manage her inheritance. The video showed a dark-haired woman who looked exhausted and angry. "I lost my job because someone convinced my supervisor that I was having a breakdown," she was telling the reporter. "I had to spend thousands of dollars on lawyers just to prove I was mentally competent. It destroyed my credit, my reputation, everything. I felt sick to my stomach." Vivian destroyed this woman's life. "And the 3rd victim?" Daniel asked grimly. Amanda Chen, 26, from Westfield Township. She was expecting a $180,000 inheritance from her grandmother's estate when someone began a campaign to have her declared unfit to receive it. The harassment was so intense that she actually moved to another state to escape it. Hayes showed us a phone interview with a young Asian woman who spoke from what appeared to be an apartment in a different city. "I had to give up my teaching job, move away from my friends, start over completely," she was saying. "Whoever was doing this to me almost succeeded in making me believe I really was losing my mind." Daniel stood and began pacing, his controlled demeanor showing cracks of genuine fury. "How many more victims are there? How long has your sister been running this operation?" "Our investigation suggests she's been at this for at least 2 years, Hayes replied. "But here's where it gets more complicated. The FBI believes she wasn't working alone." I looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "The level of coordination required to target multiple victims across several counties, the sophistication of the psychological manipulation techniques, the knowledge of legal loopholes. It suggests a larger network." Commander Hayes pulled up what appeared to be financial records on his tablet. Mrs. Williams' bank records show regular payments from something called Heritage Consulting Services. It's a shell company, but we've traced it to at least 3 other individuals who appear to be running similar operations in other regions. The implications hit me like a physical blow. This is organized crime. My sister was part of a criminal network that specializes in stealing inheritances. That's exactly what it is. Detective Morrison's voice came from the doorway as he entered with Elizabeth Crawford. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division has been tracking this network for over a year. Your sister's arrest has given them the break they needed to bring down the entire operation. Crawford sat down and opened her briefcase. Victoria, I need you to understand what this means for your case. You're no longer just a victim of family betrayal. You're a key witness in a federal racketeering investigation. I felt overwhelmed by the escalating scope of everything. Racketeering? Like organized crime? Exactly like organized crime, Detective Morrison confirmed. Heritage Consulting Services has been systematically targeting inheritance recipients across the Eastern Seaboard. They identify vulnerable young adults, usually women, who are expecting significant inheritances, then deploy sophisticated psychological warfare campaigns designed to either drive the victims to suicide or have them declared incompetent so the network can gain control of their money. The casual mention of driving victims to suicide made me dizzy. People have died because of this? Hayes nodded grimly. The FBI has identified at least 2 cases in the past 18 months, where young women committed suicide after being targeted by this network. Both left behind notes saying they felt like they were losing their minds and couldn't trust their own judgment anymore. I thought about the months of systematic gaslighting I had endured, the way Vivian had made me question my own perceptions and decisions. If I hadn't had Daniel's support and his resources to uncover the truth, could I have reached that same desperate point? Daniel returned to sit beside me, his protective instincts clearly activated. What does the FBI need from Victoria? Crawford consulted her notes. Full cooperation with their investigation. Detailed testimony about every aspect of the psychological manipulation campaign, and unfortunately willingness to be very public about what happened to her. Public how? I asked, though I suspected I wouldn't like the answer. Congressional hearings, Detective Morrison said. This case is so significant that Congress is planning hearings on inheritance fraud and elder abuse. You'll likely be asked to testify about your experiences as a way of educating lawmakers and the public about how these networks operate. The thought of testifying before Congress about the most painful and humiliating experience of my life made me feel nauseous. But as I thought about Jennifer Walsh losing her job, Sarah Martinez having her credit destroyed, Amanda Chen being forced to flee her home, and the 2 young women who had been driven to suicide, I realized I didn't have a choice. The other victims, I said quietly, Jennifer, Sarah, Amanda, are they willing to come forward too? Hayes nodded. All 3 have agreed to testify. They're actually eager to help bring down the network that targeted them. Jennifer Walsh said seeing your story on the news was the first time she realized she wasn't crazy, that what happened to her was part of a deliberate criminal conspiracy. Crawford pulled out additional documents. There's something else you should know. The FBI believes your sister was being groomed to take over as a regional coordinator for the network. Her success in targeting you was seen as proof that she was ready for a promotion. I stared at her in horror. She was going to do this to more people? Many more people. The network's business model depends on constantly recruiting new operatives and expanding into new territories. Your sister's arrest has disrupted a major expansion into the Millfield Heights region. Daniel's phone buzzed, and he answered it immediately. Kingston. He listened for a moment, his expression growing more serious. Are you certain? How many? Another pause. Double the security again, and contact the other victims' protection details immediately. He hung up and turned to us with grim news. That was my head of security. 3 members of the Heritage Consulting Network have been arrested trying to access this building. They were apparently planning something targeting Victoria. Commander Hayes was already speaking into his earpiece, coordinating with his team. Sir, we need to relocate immediately. If they're willing to make a direct move against Miss Thorne, it means they see her as a genuine threat to their entire operation. Crawford gathered her documents efficiently. This confirms what we suspected. Your testimony isn't just important for justice. It's essential to dismantling a criminal network that's been destroying lives across multiple states. As security personnel began coordinating our immediate relocation to a more secure location, I realized that my engagement party disaster had uncovered something much larger and more dangerous than family greed. My sister hadn't just been trying to steal my inheritance. She had been part of a criminal conspiracy that had killed people and destroyed countless lives. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I also realized that I had the power to fight back in a way that could make a real difference. My story, horrible as it was, could be the key to protecting other young women from experiencing what I had gone through. "I'll do it," I said as we prepared to leave. "The testimony, the hearings, whatever it takes. These people destroyed my sister, killed those 2 women, and hurt so many others. If my story can help stop them, then that's what I'm going to do." Daniel squeezed my hand. "Are you sure? Once we go down this path, there's no going back to a quiet, private life." I thought about the young women who had come forward, about the ones who hadn't survived, about all the potential future victims who could be saved if this network was destroyed. "I'm sure," I said. "It's time to end this." The safe house Daniel's security team relocated us to was a fortress disguised as a suburban home in the exclusive Pinehurst Estates, 40 minutes outside Millfield Heights. For the next week, it became the headquarters for what could only be described as the complete dismantling of the Heritage Consulting Services criminal network. What we discovered during that week changed everything I thought I knew about my sister and the true scope of the nightmare I had been living. FBI Special Agent Caroline Foster arrived on our 3rd day at the safe house carrying boxes of evidence and wearing an expression that mixed professional satisfaction with genuine anger. She was a woman in her early 40s with prematurely gray hair and the kind of focused intensity that came from years of hunting sophisticated criminals. "Miss Thorne," she said, setting up what appeared to be a command center in the dining room, "your sister's arrest triggered the collapse of one of the most sophisticated inheritance fraud networks we've ever encountered. But what we've learned about her role in this organization is going to be difficult for you to hear." Daniel sat beside me on the living room couch while Commander Hayes and Elizabeth Crawford joined Agent Foster around the dining table. The formal setup told me this wasn't going to be a casual briefing. "How difficult?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Agent Foster opened one of her boxes and pulled out what appeared to be a thick personnel file. "Your sister wasn't just a participant in this network. She was one of their most successful operatives, personally responsible for targeting at least 17 victims over the past 3 years." The number hit me like a physical blow. 17? But you said there were only 3 other victims who came forward. 3 who survived and were willing to come forward, Agent Foster corrected grimly. "We've now confirmed that your sister's campaigns resulted in 4 suicides, 6 individuals who were successfully declared incompetent and had their inheritances stolen, 4 who lost their jobs and were forced to relocate, and 3 who suffered complete mental breakdowns requiring long-term psychiatric care." I felt the room spin slightly. My sister, the woman who had read me bedtime stories as a child, had systematically destroyed the lives of 17 people. How is that possible? How did no one stop her? "Because she was exceptionally good at what she did," Agent Foster replied. "Your sister had a natural talent for psychological manipulation, and the network's training program enhanced those abilities into something truly dangerous. She studied her victims for months before beginning her campaigns, learning their vulnerabilities, their fears, their relationships. She became an expert at appearing concerned while delivering devastating psychological attacks." Crawford leaned forward with professional interest. "What kind of training program?" Agent Foster pulled out another document. "Heritage Consulting Services operated like a legitimate business. They had training manuals, performance metrics, advancement opportunities. Your sister attended workshops on psychology, legal procedures, social engineering, even acting techniques designed to help her impersonate her victims more convincingly. Daniel's jaw tightened. They were training criminals to be more effective at destroying people's lives. Exactly. And your sister was apparently their star pupil. Agent Foster opened to a page that showed what appeared to be performance rankings. She had the highest success rate in the network, meaning she was most effective at either driving victims to suicide or successfully stealing their inheritances. The casual way Agent Foster discussed my sister's success rate at destroying lives made me feel nauseous. What made her so successful? Several factors. She was intelligent, charismatic, and had an intuitive understanding of family dynamics that made her attacks particularly devastating. But most importantly, she genuinely seemed to enjoy the psychological aspects of the work. Hayes looked up from documents he had been reviewing. Enjoy it? Agent Foster nodded grimly. We've recovered recordings from the network's training sessions. Your sister is on tape discussing her techniques with other operatives, and she clearly took pride in her ability to manipulate and destroy her targets. She referred to it as, quote, breaking people down to their essential weakness. I buried my face in my hands, unable to process the image of my sister discussing the destruction of human beings like it was a professional skill. Did she ever express any remorse, any recognition that she was hurting innocent people? None whatsoever. In fact, she expressed frustration when victims proved more resilient than expected. She saw their ability to resist her psychological attacks as personal failures on her part. The revelation that my sister had viewed our months of manipulation and gaslighting as a professional challenge, something she was being graded on by criminal supervisors, made the betrayal even more devastating. Daniel stood and walked to the window, his controlled demeanor finally cracking. Agent Foster, please tell me this network has been completely dismantled. 90% dismantled. We've arrested 43 individuals across 12 states, seized millions in stolen assets, and shut down the training facilities. But there are still a few operatives we haven't located, and we believe some of them may be planning retaliation against the witnesses who brought down their operation. Commander Hayes spoke into his earpiece, then addressed the group. Sir, we've had 3 more attempts to breach the safe house perimeter in the past 24 hours. These people are getting increasingly desperate. Agent Foster consulted her notes. That brings me to something else you need to know, Victoria. Your sister has been offering to cooperate with our investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence. I looked up sharply. What kind of cooperation? She claims to have detailed information about the network's leadership, their methods, and their future targets. She's offered to testify against her former associates and help us locate the remaining operatives. Crawford raised an eyebrow. What does she want in return? Relocation to minimum security prison, protective custody, and the possibility of parole in 15 years instead of the life sentence she's currently facing. The idea that Vivian was trying to negotiate her way out of the consequences of destroying 17 lives filled me with rage. After everything she's done, she thinks she deserves a deal? The FBI is considering it, Agent Foster said carefully. Her information could help us save future victims and locate the network's remaining assets. But any deal would require the approval of all the victims she personally targeted. I stood up abruptly, anger giving me energy I hadn't felt in weeks. She wants me to help her avoid the consequences of trying to destroy my life? Daniel returned from the window and placed a protective hand on my shoulder. Victoria, you don't have to decide anything right now. Agent Foster pulled out another document. There's something else. Your sister has requested a meeting with you. She claims she wants to apologize and explain her actions. The suggestion that I should sit in a room with the woman who had systematically tried to drive me to psychological collapse felt absurd. Why would I want to hear anything she has to say? Because, Agent Foster said quietly, her information might be the key to preventing this from happening to dozens of other young women. The network was planning a major expansion. They had identified over 200 potential targets across the country. 200 more women who could experience what I had gone through. 200 more families that could be destroyed. 200 more lives that could be lost to suicide or psychological breakdown. Crawford spoke up. If you decide to meet with her, it would be under controlled conditions with full legal protection. You wouldn't be alone, and anything she says could be used in the prosecution of the remaining network members. Hayes received another communication through his earpiece. Agent Foster, I'm getting reports that Preston Williams is also requesting to speak with Miss Thorne. He's been cooperating with the investigation and claims to have information about his wife's victims that only Victoria can help us understand. I thought about Preston's horrified expression at the engagement party when he recognized Daniel's true identity. He had seemed genuinely shocked by some of Vivian's revelations, suggesting he might not have known the full extent of her criminal activities. What kind of information? I asked. Agent Foster consulted her tablet. He claims your sister kept a detailed psychological profiles of all her victims, including strategies that worked and ones that didn't. He thinks you might be able to help us understand those profiles in ways that could help other victims recover from their trauma. The idea that my experience with Vivian could be used to help other victims heal from similar abuse was compelling. If I could help Jennifer Walsh, Sarah Martinez, Amanda Chen, and the others understand the techniques that had been used against them, maybe I could help them reclaim their sense of reality and self-worth. Agent Foster, I said slowly, if I agree to these meetings, what guarantees do I have that the information will actually be used to help people and not just to give my sister a lighter sentence? Full transparency. You'll be present for all negotiations regarding any potential plea deal. You'll have veto power over any agreement that doesn't meet your standards for justice. And most importantly, any deal would require your sister to provide ongoing assistance in helping her victims recover, including funding for therapy and other support services. Daniel squeezed my shoulder supportively. Victoria, whatever you decide, you'll have my full support and protection. I looked around the room at the team of professionals who had mobilized to protect me and seek justice for what had been done to me and so many others. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had genuine control over what happened next. I want to hear what they have to say, I said finally. But I want Elizabeth Crawford present for every conversation, and I want everything recorded. If my sister and Preston have information that can help other victims or prevent future crimes, then I need to hear it. Agent Foster nodded approvingly. I'll set up the meetings for tomorrow. And Victoria, I want you to know that your courage in coming forward has already saved lives. The 200 women the network was planning to target are safe because you are willing to fight back. As I prepared for what would undoubtedly be the most difficult conversations of my life, I realized that my journey from victim to survivor was about to take another unexpected turn. Tomorrow, I would face the people who had tried to destroy me and decide whether their information was worth the price of showing them mercy. The federal courthouse in downtown Millfield Heights had been transformed into a fortress for the Heritage Consulting Services trials. Metal detectors, armed marshals, and bomb-sniffing dogs created an atmosphere more suited to a terrorism case than what most people would consider family drama. But as I sat in the witness waiting room on the morning of my testimony, I understood that this case had transcended family boundaries long ago. Victoria, Elizabeth Crawford said, adjusting her suit jacket as she reviewed her notes one final time, remember that everything you say today is being broadcast live to a congressional hearing. Your words will be part of the permanent record that shapes how inheritance fraud is prosecuted in the future. Through the small window, I could see protesters on the courthouse steps. Some carried signs supporting victims of financial abuse, while others demanded harsher sentences for the Heritage Network members. The media attention had been overwhelming for weeks, with my story becoming a symbol of how sophisticated criminals could exploit family relationships to commit devastating crimes. Agent Foster entered the waiting room carrying a tablet and wearing an expression of grim satisfaction. "Victoria, I wanted to update you before you testify. The information your sister and Preston provided has been even more valuable than we hoped." Daniel looked up from where he had been reviewing security protocols with Commander Hayes. "What kind of results?" "We've located and arrested the final 7 network operatives, including the leadership tier we thought had escaped. More importantly, we've recovered detailed records of every victim they targeted over the past 5 years." Agent Foster set down her tablet and pulled up what appeared to be a database. "The total number of victims is staggering, over 300 individuals across 18 states." I felt dizzy at the magnitude of the criminal enterprise my sister had been part of. 300 people? 300 confirmed cases, with evidence suggesting the number could be much higher. Your sister's cooperation helped us understand their victim selection criteria, their training methods, and most importantly, their expansion plans. Crawford leaned forward with professional interest. "What were the expansion plans?" Agent Foster's expression grew even more serious. "They were planning to go international. The network had been researching inheritance laws in Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia, with plans to establish operations in all 3 countries within the next 18 months. The idea that this criminal enterprise could have spread globally, destroying lives on multiple continents, made me realize the true importance of what we had accomplished by exposing them." "Agent Foster," I said quietly, "what happened to all those victims, the 300 people my sister and her associates targeted?" "That's actually part of why your testimony today is so crucial. We've been able to contact most of them, and many are getting their lives back. Stolen inheritances are being recovered, false medical diagnoses are being overturned, criminal records created through identity theft are being expunged." She pulled up another screen on her tablet. Jennifer Walsh got her job back and received a settlement from her former employer for wrongful termination. Sarah Martinez's credit has been restored and she's starting her own business with her recovered inheritance. Amanda Chen moved back to her hometown and is teaching again. For the first time in months, I felt something that might have been genuine hope. They're okay? More than okay, they're thriving. And they all want to thank you personally for having the courage to fight back when they couldn't. Daniel squeezed my hand supportively. "Victoria, what you did by refusing to be silenced has given all those people their lives back." A court clerk appeared in the doorway. "Miss Thorne, the judge is ready for your testimony." As we walked through the courthouse corridors toward the main courtroom, I caught glimpses of the media circus surrounding the case. Reporters from major networks, newspaper journalists, and even international correspondents had descended on Millfield Heights to cover what legal experts were calling the most significant inheritance fraud case in American history. The courtroom itself was packed beyond capacity. I recognized Jennifer Walsh, Sarah Martinez, and Amanda Chen sitting in the front row reserved for victims. Behind them, I saw dozens of other faces, some familiar from news coverage of other victims, others unknown but clearly there to support the prosecution of the network that had destroyed so many lives. My parents sat in the second row, their faces showing the complex mix of emotions that came from watching their daughter testify against their other daughter. They had been supportive throughout the legal process, but I knew they were still struggling to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the criminal Vivian had become. Judge Patricia Morrison called the courtroom to order, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had presided over many high-profile cases. "This court is now in session for the sentencing phase of United States v. Heritage Consulting Services et al. Miss Thorne, please approach the witness stand." As I walked toward the front of the courtroom, I passed the defendant's table where Vivian sat with her court-appointed attorney. She looked smaller than I remembered, her designer clothes replaced with an orange prison jumpsuit, her carefully styled hair now lank and unkempt. When our eyes met briefly, I saw something I had never seen in her before: genuine fear. "Miss Thorne, The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Michael Richardson, began. Please tell the court about the impact your sister's criminal activities have had on your life. I had rehearsed this testimony dozens of times, but facing a courtroom full of people while knowing my words were being broadcast live to Congress made my voice shake initially. Your Honor, when my sister began her campaign against me, I thought I was losing my mind. She was so skilled at making me question my own perceptions, my own judgment, that I began to believe I really might be mentally unstable. The courtroom was absolutely silent as I described the months of psychological manipulation, the systematic attempts to isolate me from my support systems, the gradual erosion of my confidence and self-worth. But the psychological abuse was just the beginning, I continued, my voice growing stronger. She stole my identity, accessed my medical records, forged my signature on financial documents, and attempted to have me declared incompetent so she could steal my inheritance. She turned what should have been the happiest night of my life, my engagement party, into a public humiliation designed to support her legal case against my mental fitness. Judge Morrison leaned forward slightly. Miss Thorne, in your opinion, what would be an appropriate sentence for your sister's crimes? I had dreaded this question, knowing that my answer would influence not only Vivian's fate, but also the sentences of the other network members. Your Honor, my sister destroyed 17 lives through her participation in this criminal network. 4 people died by suicide because of her actions. Others lost their homes, their jobs, their families, their sanity. I paused, looking directly at Vivian for the first time since beginning my testimony. But I also know that the information she provided has helped law enforcement save hundreds of other potential victims and recover millions of dollars in stolen assets. While I can never forgive what she did to me and the other victims, I believe justice requires acknowledging both the harm she caused and the help she ultimately provided. Judge Morrison nodded thoughtfully. What specific recommendation do you make to this court? I recommend that my sister serve the full sentence for her crimes, 25 years in federal prison, but that she be required to spend part of that time actively helping other victims recover from similar abuse. She should be required to provide ongoing cooperation with law enforcement, fund therapy and support services for her victims, and participate in research that could help prevent similar crimes in the future. The courtroom remained silent as Judge Morrison considered my words. After several minutes, she spoke directly to the defendants. The crimes committed by the Heritage Consulting Services Network represent a new form of terrorism, psychological terrorism designed to destroy lives through systematic manipulation and fraud. The victims in this case showed remarkable courage in coming forward, and their testimony has helped dismantle one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises this court has ever encountered. She looked specifically at Vivian. Mrs. Williams, your cooperation with law enforcement has been valuable, but it cannot undo the devastating harm you caused to 17 innocent people. This court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison, with the possibility of supervised release after 15 years contingent on your ongoing cooperation with victim assistance programs. The gavel fell with a sound that seemed to echo through the silent courtroom. As Vivian was led away in shackles, she looked back at me one final time. I saw no anger or resentment in her expression, only a kind of resigned acceptance that her choices had led inevitably to this moment. As I left the witness stand, I felt something I hadn't experienced in almost a year: genuine peace. The nightmare was finally over. Justice had been served, and hundreds of potential victims had been saved from experiencing what I had endured. But most importantly, I had learned that I was strong enough to fight back against even the most sophisticated forms of manipulation and abuse, and that sometimes the worst experiences in life could be transformed into something that helps others. The scared, isolated woman who had been systematically destroyed by her own sister was gone. In her place was someone who understood her own worth and was prepared to use her experience to protect others from similar harm. 6 months after Vivian's sentencing, I stood in the empty shell of what had once been the Heritage Consulting Services headquarters in downtown Millfield Heights. The FBI had finished processing the crime scene, and the building's owner had asked Daniel and me to tour the space before it was renovated and repurposed. What I saw there changed my understanding of just how close I had come to complete destruction. "This was your sister's office," Agent Foster said, opening the door to a corner room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The space was eerily pristine now, but evidence markers on the walls showed where dozens of victim photographs had been displayed like trophies. Elizabeth Crawford, who had become not just my attorney but a trusted friend, pulled out photographs from the FBI's evidence files. "Victoria, I want you to see this, but I need to warn you. It's going to be disturbing." The photographs showed Vivian's office as it had been during the height of her criminal activities. One entire wall was covered with pictures of her victims, arranged in chronological order with detailed notes about their psychological vulnerabilities, their family relationships, and the specific techniques that had been most effective in breaking them down. My own photograph was prominently displayed in the center, surrounded by what appeared to be a detailed timeline of our interactions going back over 2 years. Notes in Vivian's handwriting described me as trusting to a fault, desperate for family acceptance, and ideal long-term target for comprehensive psychological dismantling. She had been planning this for 2 years? I asked, studying the meticulous documentation of my life that covered every aspect from my work schedule to my volunteer activities to my dating history. Agent Foster nodded grimly. "Your sister was assigned to you specifically because the network psychologists believed you would be their most challenging target. Your education, your stable employment, your community connections, everything that should have protected you actually made you more valuable to them as a test case." Daniel placed a protective arm around my shoulders as I continued to study the wall of victims. A test case for what? For their expansion into targeting higher-functioning, more socially connected victims, Crawford explained. Most inheritance fraud focuses on isolated, vulnerable individuals. But the network wanted to prove they could destroy anyone, regardless of their support systems or professional status. I moved closer to examine the other photographs on the wall. Jennifer Walsh, Sarah Martinez, Amanda Chen, all the women I had come to know through our shared experience were there, along with dozens of others I didn't recognize. But what shocked me most was seeing photographs of women who appeared to be living normal, successful lives. "These other victims," I said, pointing to several photos, "they don't look like people who would be easy targets." "They weren't," Agent Foster confirmed. Dr. Rebecca Thompson was a successful pediatrician. Lisa Chang was a federal prosecutor. Maria Santos owned 3 restaurants. The network specifically targeted accomplished women, because destroying them sent a message about their capabilities. The calculated cruelty of using successful women as examples to terrorize others was breathtaking. But as I studied the wall more carefully, I noticed something else. Several photographs had been marked with red X's across the faces. "What do the red marks mean?" I asked, though I suspected I didn't want to know the answer. Crawford's expression grew even more somber. "Those are the victims who didn't survive, the suicides, the complete mental breakdowns, the ones who were successfully driven to destroy themselves." I counted 7 red X's and felt sick to my stomach. 7 women who had been murdered through psychological warfare, their deaths as deliberate as if they had been shot or stabbed. "Victoria," Agent Foster said gently, "there's something else you need to see. Your sister kept detailed video logs of her sessions with network supervisors. We'd like you to watch one of them, but only if you feel strong enough." I hesitated, knowing that whatever I was about to see would be permanently burned into my memory. But I also knew that understanding the full scope of what had been done to me might be necessary for my complete recovery. "Show me," I said. Agent Foster set up a laptop on the empty desk and pulled up a video file dated 3 weeks before my engagement party. The video showed Vivian sitting in this very office, speaking to someone off camera with an expression of professional satisfaction. Subject 17 is responding exactly as predicted, Vivian was saying, consulting notes that I now recognized as being about me. The isolation campaign has been highly effective. She's questioning her own judgment and becoming increasingly dependent on family approval. I'm ready to move to the final phase. The off-camera voice, which sounded like an older man, responded, "What about the boyfriend? He could complicate the psychological breakdown." "Actually, he's perfect," Vivian replied with a cold smile. She's so invested in this relationship that destroying it publicly will provide the final push toward complete collapse. I've already prepared the competency documents. After the engagement party humiliation, she'll be so destabilized that getting her declared unfit will be simple. I watched in horrified fascination as my sister discussed my upcoming psychological destruction with the same tone she might use to describe a business presentation. There was no emotion in her voice, no recognition that she was planning to destroy her own sister's life. I was simply subject 17, a problem to be solved through systematic abuse. The beauty of this case, Vivian continued, is that she genuinely loves me. Every attack I make hurts her more, because it's coming from someone she trusts. The family dynamic makes the psychological warfare exponentially more effective. The video ended, leaving the office in silence except for the sound of traffic from the street below. I stood there processing what I had just witnessed, my sister calmly discussing how my love for her could be weaponized to destroy me more efficiently. "How many of these videos are there?" I asked quietly. 47, Agent Foster replied. "Documenting every aspect of her campaign against you and providing detailed analysis of the techniques that were most effective. The network used these videos as training materials for other operatives." The realization that my suffering had been turned into educational content for other criminals felt like a violation beyond anything I had previously experienced. But it also gave me a crystal clear understanding of exactly what I had survived and why my recovery was so important. Daniel's phone buzzed, and he answered it with obvious reluctance. "Kingston." He listened for a moment, his expression growing concerned. "Are you certain? How long do we have?" After hanging up, he turned to us with grim news. "The parole board is reviewing Vivian's case early. Her cooperation with ongoing investigations has impressed them, and they're considering reducing her sentence." I felt the familiar surge of anger that came whenever my sister tried to escape the consequences of her actions. "After everything she did, they want to let her out early?" Crawford consulted her phone, clearly checking legal databases. "It's not uncommon in cases involving cooperation with federal investigations, but any early release would require approval from the victims she personally targeted." "Which means you have veto power," Agent Foster explained. "She can't be released without your consent, and the consent of the other 16 surviving victims." I thought about the 7 red X's on the wall, the women who couldn't give consent because my sister's actions had driven them to suicide. I thought about Jennifer Walsh, Sarah Martinez, Amanda Chen, and all the others who were still rebuilding their lives after Vivian's attacks. "I need to talk to the other victims," I said. "This decision affects all of us, and we should make it together." As we prepared to leave the empty office that had served as the headquarters for so much suffering, I realized that my journey from victim to survivor was entering a new phase. The formal legal proceedings were over, but the emotional and psychological recovery would continue for years. But I also understood that I had been fundamentally changed by this experience, in ways that went beyond trauma. I had learned that I was capable of surviving systematic psychological warfare, of fighting back against sophisticated criminal enterprises, and of helping other victims find their own paths to recovery. The scared, isolated woman who had been targeted for destruction was gone forever. In her place was someone who understood the true value of resilience, the importance of authentic relationships, and the power of refusing to be silenced by those who would abuse their position of trust. Whatever decision we made about Vivian's early release, it would be made from a position of strength, not fear. And that, more than any legal victory, felt like the ultimate triumph over everything she had tried to do to me. 2 years after that devastating engagement party, I stood in the main conference room of the newly established Thorn Foundation for Inheritance Protection, surrounded by the 17 women whose lives had been forever changed by my sister's criminal network. Today marked the official launch of our comprehensive victim support program, but more importantly, it represented the completion of my transformation from target to protector. "Ladies," I said, looking around the table at faces that had become as familiar as family, "when we first came together to decide about Vivian's early release, I don't think any of us imagined we'd end up here." Jennifer Walsh, now our foundation's Director of Victim Outreach, smiled as she consulted her notes. "Victoria, in the 18 months since we denied the early release and demanded extended community service instead, we've helped over 200 inheritance fraud victims across the country. The ripple effects of your decision to fight back just keep expanding." Sarah Martinez, who had used her recovered inheritance to earn a law degree specializing in financial crimes, pulled up statistics on her laptop. The Thorn Foundation model is being replicated in 6 other states. We've successfully lobbied for new federal legislation making inheritance fraud a specific category of elder abuse, even when the victims are young adults. And our victim recovery program has a 93% success rate in helping people rebuild their lives. Amanda Chen, now our lead counselor for psychological recovery, added her own perspective. "But the most important thing we've accomplished is proving that victims can become advocates. Every woman in this room has transformed their trauma into purpose, and that's inspiring other survivors to do the same." Daniel entered the conference room carrying our 6-month-old daughter, Emma Rose Kingston, who had become the unofficial mascot of our foundation meetings. The sight of him effortlessly managing both his global business empire and diaper changes never failed to make me smile. "Sorry I'm late," he said, settling Emma in her portable crib near the window. "The Kingston Foundation board meeting ran long, but I have good news. They've approved our proposal to fund inheritance protection programs internationally. We're going to help victims in Canada, the UK, and Australia, the exact countries where the Heritage Network was planning to expand." I felt the familiar surge of satisfaction that came from turning my sister's criminal plans into tools for helping others. "How much funding?" $50 million over 5 years, Daniel replied, his voice carrying the quiet pride he always showed when discussing our joint humanitarian efforts. "Enough to establish comprehensive victim support systems in all 3 countries and fund research into preventing similar criminal networks from forming." Dr. Patricia Hammond, the handwriting expert who had testified at Vivian's trial and now served on our advisory board, looked up from documents she had been reviewing. "Victoria, I wanted to share something with the group. We've just received confirmation that the psychological warfare techniques developed by the Heritage Network have been completely disrupted. No new cases matching their methodology have been reported anywhere in North America for over a year. The significance of that achievement wasn't lost on any of us. The criminal enterprise that had destroyed so many lives had been not just dismantled, but replaced with systems designed to protect and empower potential victims." My phone buzzed with a text message that made me pause. It was from Commander Hayes, who now ran security for the Foundation. "Vivian Williams requesting video conference with you. Claims urgent information about remaining network assets. Your call." I showed the message to Elizabeth Crawford, who had transitioned from being my attorney to serving as the Foundation's general counsel. She read it and shook her head with familiar exasperation. "Your sister contacts us every few months claiming to have new information," Crawford said. "Usually it's just another attempt to negotiate for better prison conditions or early release consideration." "What do you think this time?" I asked, though I already knew my answer. "I think," Crawford replied with a slight smile, "that you've moved far beyond needing to respond to her manipulations. You've built something beautiful from the wreckage she created. And engaging with her attempts to remain relevant in your life, would only diminish what you've accomplished. I looked around the conference room at the women who had become my chosen family, survivors who had transformed their worst experiences into advocacy for others, professionals who had dedicated their careers to preventing similar crimes, friends who understood trauma and recovery in ways that only shared experience could provide. "You're right," I said, deleting the message without responding. "I have everything I need right here." Jennifer stood and walked to a wall display showing photographs and updates from the victims we had helped over the past 2 years. "Victoria, do you remember what you said when we first met? You told me that surviving what your sister did to us was just the beginning, that the real victory would be using our experience to protect others." I nodded, remembering that difficult conversation when we were all still raw from our experiences and uncertain about our futures. "Well," Jennifer continued, gesturing to the wall of success stories, "look what we've built. Rebecca Martinez got her teaching job back and is now training other educators to recognize signs of psychological manipulation. David Chen recovered his stolen inheritance and used it to start a nonprofit supporting other fraud victims. Lisa Thompson completed her medical residency and now specializes in treating trauma survivors." Each photograph represented not just a life rebuilt, but a person who had chosen to transform their pain into purpose. The pattern that had started with our small group of Vivian's victims had expanded into a movement of survivors helping survivors. Amanda consulted her tablet and smiled. "And speaking of transformations, I have an update about someone special. Do you remember Patricia Wells, the young woman from Oregon whose family tried to have her declared incompetent after she inherited her grandfather's farm?" "Of course," I replied. Patricia had been one of our first cases. A 24-year-old whose family had hired lawyers to challenge her mental fitness when she refused to sell inherited property they wanted to develop. She just called to tell us she's getting married next month, to the attorney who helped her fight her family's competency challenge. She wants to invite the entire foundation team to the wedding. The room erupted in applause and happy chatter. Patricia's journey from a frightened young woman who had been told she was too unstable to manage her own affairs to a confident bride planning her future was exactly the kind of transformation that made our work meaningful. Daniel bounced Emma gently as she started to fuss, and I couldn't help but think about the future we were building for her, a world where young women would have stronger protections against the kind of systematic abuse I had experienced, where victims would have immediate access to support and advocacy, where criminal networks like Heritage would be quickly identified and dismantled. "There's one more thing," I said, standing to address the group. "I've been invited to speak at the International Conference on Financial Crimes next month. They want me to present our model as a case study in victim empowerment and criminal network disruption." Sarah looked up with interest. "Are you nervous about speaking to such a large audience?" I thought about the question seriously. 2 years ago, the idea of speaking publicly about what Vivian had done to me would have filled me with terror and shame. Now, sharing my story felt like a privilege and a responsibility. "No," I said, surprising myself with how confident I sounded. "I am excited. Every time I tell our story, every time I explain how we turned systematic abuse into systematic healing, there's a chance that someone in the audience will recognize similar patterns in their own life, or will be inspired to help other victims." As the meeting concluded and our team began gathering their materials, I walked to the window overlooking downtown Millfield Heights. The city looked different to me now. Not like the place where I had been targeted and nearly destroyed, but like the place where I had learned my own strength and decided to use it to protect others. Daniel joined me at the window, Emma now sleeping peacefully in his arms. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. I thought about everything that had brought us to this moment: the humiliation at our engagement party, the months of legal battles, the difficult process of rebuilding my sense of self, the decision to create something meaningful from the trauma. "None," I said, and meant it completely. If going through hell was the price of being able to help all these people, of building something that will protect future victims, of creating this family of survivors, then it was worth every moment. Emma stirred in Daniel's arms and opened her eyes, looking up at us with the perfect trust that only babies possess. As I watched her tiny face, I realized that my greatest transformation wasn't from victim to survivor, or even from survivor to advocate. My greatest transformation was learning that love, real love, isn't something that can be weaponized or manipulated. It's something that grows stronger when it's tested, something that creates rather than destroys, something that builds communities of protection and support. Looking at my chosen family of fellow survivors, my husband who had stood by me through everything, and my daughter who would grow up in a world made safer by our work, I understood that the scared, isolated woman who had been targeted by her own sister was truly gone. In her place was someone who had discovered her purpose, claimed her power, and learned that sometimes the most devastating attacks can become the foundation for the most meaningful victories. If you found Victoria's journey from victim to advocate inspiring, smash that like button now. My favorite moment was when she chose to build something beautiful from her trauma, instead of just seeking revenge. What part of her transformation touched you the most? Let us know in the comments below. For more stories about turning pain into purpose and finding strength you never knew you had, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Remember, sometimes our worst experiences become the foundation for our greatest contributions to the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.